Hello and welcome to sim.bc, where it right now is 16:52 and I have unbranded my bottle. I know it was on time, right? Because I've had it for the longest time and I've always been thinking like, should debrand it, right? I really should debrand it. I don't want to just give out free branding, right? And I don't want to risk being like dragged down to any legal issues later down the line. Am I right, people? Am I right? Just a moment, mates. So today I had quite a spectacular day actually. Spectacular is probably the wrong word, but quite an eventful day with things going all over the place. Had my electricity company calling me about a bill from France. That's always a good idea, right? That's always a good feeling when you get that, you haven't paid. And I was like, what? I haven't paid? But I thought I would have paid, but it apparently just turns out that the automatic payment that I used in France, they just didn't implement that for the final bill for some reason, right? For some reason, I don't know why, but they were just like, yeah, you need to pay this manually. Didn't we tell you? And I was like, no, you didn't tell me that when I was calling you last time. And they were like, yeah, but that's the case. And I was like, okay, can you like remove all of the lateness bills because you actually lied to me? Not lied to me, but you kind of misinformed me, mate, so it's your error. And they were kind enough to do that. So that all turned out quite fine, but yet again, eventful, mates, eventful. And then I went to school, had a nice bit of introduction to the thesis that we're gonna write, our last the last assignment in university for our examination, which was all good, all fine. Yet again, eventful, not that interesting, but eventful. Lots of stuff going on, lots of information that I got access to. Had a really nice teacher that I haven't had since my first year, I would like to say, since my first year in school, who is like a really good teacher. She's really captivating the audience and walking around and utilizing the entire room, right, when she's talking. So I thought that was inspiring in a way. See that kind of, that kind of energy, even at her age. I don't want to say age, that's not what I mean, but she's like in the older, in the older quarter, so to say, of all of the employees, so out of all our teachers, but you still have more energy than lots of the PhD students. Maybe that's a question about, how much you're into teaching overall. Maybe that plays a role, but I thought it was amazing to just have her again because she's yet again so captivating and so good at what she's doing. But that is not why you're here, mates. No, you're here because we're going to keep going on yesterday's serve, and today we're going to talk about make sure that every question is necessary. And this is yet again tips and tricks for making an in-between question that is not too hard and not too easy and is interesting as well to your audience. Yet again, talking about my teacher from today, who was both captivating, interesting, and kept it fairly simple, even though giving questions that was at a high enough level to actually be challenging for us, to make people actually want to answer the questions. There were some hands raised, which is always a good sign, this interaction with the audience. And yet again, we were talking, not yet again, but we were also talking about gamification, that many people were like, what's that? What's gamification? And I, who'd read the chapters from Taylor Brands quite recently, I was just, aha, I know what that is. Amazing, mates. I've gained some information that actually benefited me in school from this little project that we're doing right here. So that was all fine, all good. Felt really nice, actually. But as I said, today we're going to talk about make sure that every, and I mean every question is necessary. Because what you don't want to do is come into, I don't know, let's say a job application. You've applied for a job, you're coming into the interviewer, ask the interviewee, and you say like, hello, I would like to work here, and they're just bombarding you with questions that doesn't mean a thing for your position, and you're just like, what is this? And you get quite bored. You get a bad relationship rather with the person who's interviewing you and you yourself, and you're feeling like maybe this place isn't for me. If you're in class, the teacher is bombarding you yet again with the questions that you feel is not according to this course. Let's say that you're discussing management, right? Management in an organization, and the tutor or the lecturer is talking about, or taking up rather, questions about how much does it cost to implement a new chair at IKEA or any other place? How much does it cost for your company to implement a new kind of oil solution? And sure, that does have to do with management, but maybe not management overall as in people. Let's say then, for instance, that you're discussing HR and team management. You're talking about human resources. You're talking about how is the team evolving. You're talking about how am I making a team more effective? How am I translating this group into a team? And your teacher is just saying like, and now it's time for some questions. We spent the last 2.5 hours talking about human resources. What is a car? And you're just like, hold on a minute. What do you mean, what is a car? A car has nothing to do with human resources. And then they kind of lead into it later on that, well, this is why I asked about the car, because all of the car components kind of relates to a certain point and a certain aspect of team management, and this is the way I'm introducing this type of theory. That's the best case solution in that, in that regards, in that point in time. But it can also be the case that they're just saying, well, I was just asking for cars for no apparent reason. But if you're going to implement a theory in that way, that you're saying, well, the car, I'm talking about the car because all of the different components in a car is actually translating into parts of theory that is in relation to HR and team management, then introduce that in the beginning so that people don't just sit there and be like, this is unnecessary. Because people, students overall, right, tend to rather listen in intervals. They listen intensively right in the beginning, exactly when you start. You have their attention, and then you start talking about stuff they don't really care about, that's not really on the course. Maybe it's examples, maybe it's not theory anymore, and people just tend to drift away. So you want to keep it necessary, the questions as necessary as possible, for students not to, yet again, drift away when you're asking them stuff, because that's not good for anybody. And this is yet again in order to make sure that all the questions that are necessary are not too hard and not too easy. They're exactly in the middle. And as I said, we have 10 different tips that we're going to go over the course of the next coming days that are going to help with this. But let's put it in a situation when you're at work, because when you're at work, you're going to answer questions as well. I know it's hard, right? Some people say, I began studying and it was hard, but I thought it was going to be easier after that. Then you move on to the next level, maybe high school, and you say, well, it's still not easy. Then you move to university and you're like, this is still not easy. And then you're thinking, I'm taking my graduation. Soon I will be allowed to work. So you go to your graduation, you take it, and then you go into a job and you're like, this is even harder. What am I doing? Of course, that's all about the mindset, mates. It's all about a mindset, I think. But many people tend to view this like this translation between university and actually working as now it's going to be all easy, but they tend to have questions there as well. They tend to have internal, education in the company. And many people will feel like, well, back to school, even though I have a 9 to 5 hour schedule, right? I have a 9 to 5 schedule instead of the 12 to 2 schedule that I had at university. I have to work and still I have to learn new stuff. So let's say that we put you as an employee at a company. And then the person in charge, your boss, your manager, comes to you and says, well, now it's time to evaluate what we're doing here. It's time to evaluate how you felt at this position, at work, at this place for the latest, 12 months maybe. And you're saying, yes, finally it's time for me to express my opinion, right? Finally it's time for me to say what I want and what I think. But then the manager, you start your little interview about how you, about the feedback, how you're feeling at the company by saying, so what car are you driving? And you're just like, what? You had so many good ideas, so many things that you want to talk about, so many things that have to do with how you felt, how you've been incorporated in the company, how you've been assimilating in the corporation, what's the corporate culture, how are you interpreting it, how it is supposed to be incorporated. And then this person just says, how's your car? What type of car are you driving? Is it a nice car? And that's all fine and dandy if you just want to try and establish a personal relation between you both in the beginning of the interview. But if they keep going with unnecessary questions, that's when it becomes a problem, because then you, yet again, just as if you were a student in a lecture hall, you will drift away. And maybe you don't do that by your choice. Maybe you do that unconsciously. Maybe you don't even know that it's something you do, but most people tend to do that. When they're put in a situation where you're bombarded or asked a lot of unnecessary questions, you tend to stop listening. And this will, in relation, make every question so much harder, because the more times you drift out, the harder it will be to establish and understanding the context in which the questions is actually asked from. Hence, it will make them harder. So keep them necessary. A good question then could be from your manager saying, how do you feel in the workforce? Because now you can express yourself. It's an open question, right? You can express lots about this. You can take in your own perspective, your own opinion, and work with the funnel base, right? You work from the general to more specific, more specific, more specific. Because when he asks you or she asks you, when your manager asks you, like gender neutral, everybody has the same possibilities. Am I right? PC and all of that? Yeah. Anyway, your manager sits there and they maybe begin to ask something like, how do you feel at work? And then you can start talking about how you're feeling at work. Depending on how you feel at work, you will probably address something that you feel is the most important part, the earliest, something that you believe will take the longest time to discuss, something that you think is the most important part, the thing that you finally are able to share with your manager. And now that your manager knows that that is your point of view, that's the main problem that you have when it comes to fitting into the corporation. If you're not just one of those people who say, well, there's nothing wrong, but there really is. Now you can be the silent majority, even though you're actually talking, because you're talking to your manager in an interview. Anyway, let's say that you're starting with talking and saying that, well, I'm actually not liking the times that I'm working. I'm working 9 to 5 and I don't feel that fulfilling. Now the manager, as I said, know what you're having a problem with and can work from that perspective down to the details of why the timings are bad, maybe why you would like to prefer other times. It's something to do with your personal life. Is it intervening with other stuff? Why can we fix this? How can we fix this? Can we not fix this? Is there anything that we can maybe complement or twist a bit in your working schedule so that you can go home earlier, so that we can change this, so that it's not that big of a deal? Is it perhaps just the surface problem and there are underlying problems underneath? And maybe then you start to take up, when you work through the when you work through the funnel of general questions, specific, maybe you come to the realization that this is just a surface problem. Here is the next big one, and then you work from that, from a general perspective, down to a new specific point, until you come to the main point of concern, what you actually think about. And that's a way you can work through your questions while simultaneously making them a bit more digestible, a bit more easy for both of you to work through. So make sure that questions are necessary so that people don't drift away, because people will drift away if you ask them questions that they believe are stupid. Now, there are no stupid questions, just dumb answers. Am I right, people? But still, people don't always think like that. So it's important for you as a lecturer asking the necessary questions. Make sure that they fit in the context. If they don't, apparently, if they're a bit abstract, make sure that you explain why you're asking about this abstract concept, this abstract question that doesn't seem at surface level to have anything to do with the subject or with what you're talking about, in order to make sure that people don't drift away. It is really important because, as I said, and I'm just going to end this with this statement, the more people are drifting away, the harder it will be for them to understanding the context. Hence, it doesn't matter in the end how necessary your question is if people don't understand why you're asking them this question to begin with, because you began with so many questions that were unnecessary, so that they drifted away. Yet again, this is from the mindset, my mindset, that the lecturer, the tutor, has 90% of the responsibility when it comes to employee and student engagement, with the audience engagement overall. And they just have 10% of that, and that is actually sitting there silently and taking in what you do, except when they're answering questions, but you get what I'm saying. Anyway, that was everything for me today, mates. We're going to go through, keep it short and simple, tomorrow, mates. Maybe a bit more, depending on how much it takes. But today, well, it took an entire video just talking about make sure that every question is necessary. So, have a nice one, mates, and I'll see you tomorrow.